Michael Chun had always considered himself a rational man. At 42, he'd built a successful career as a software engineer, maintained a modest but comfortable home in suburban Portland, and enjoyed what he believed was a stable 15-year marriage to his wife, Rebecca. Their life together followed predictable patterns: Sunday brunches, bi-weekly date nights, annual vacations to beach resorts where Rebecca could tan and Michael could read his thriller novels in peace. It was a Tuesday evening in late October when the first crack appeared in his carefully constructed reality. Michael sat in his home office, reviewing code for a client project, when Rebecca's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter downstairs. She was in the shower, and the sound carried through their split-level house with unusual clarity. He wouldn't have thought twice about it, except the phone buzzed again, and again, and again. 5 messages in rapid succession. Michael saved his work and walked downstairs, intending to call up to Rebecca that someone was trying to reach her urgently. But when he glanced at the screen, the preview messages made his blood run cold. "Can't stop thinking about last night," the first one read. The sender was listed as David, contractor. "When can I see you again?" read the second. The third message was just an eggplant emoji followed by a fire emoji. Michael's hand trembled as he picked up the phone. His mind raced through innocent explanations. David was the contractor they'd hired 3 months ago to finish their basement renovation. Maybe he was just being friendly? Maybe Rebecca had mentioned she'd had a nice time at some work event last night, and David was. No, that made no sense. The emojis left little room for misinterpretation. He heard the shower shut off upstairs. In that moment, Michael made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting Rebecca immediately, he opened her phone. He knew her passcode was their anniversary, 0614, and quickly forwarded the messages to himself before deleting the forwarding record. His heart hammered against his ribs as he heard her footsteps in the bedroom above. He set the phone back on the counter exactly where it had been and returned to his office, closing the door quietly. His hands were shaking so badly, he could barely hold his mouse. The code on his screen blurred as tears welled in his eyes. 15 years. They'd been married for 15 years. They'd weathered his mother's death, Rebecca's miscarriage, his layoff during the recession. How could she do this? "Honey," Rebecca's voice called from downstairs. "Do you want Thai or pizza for dinner?" Her tone was so casual, so perfectly normal, that Michael felt sick to his stomach. He swallowed hard and forced his voice to sound steady. "Whatever you want," he called back, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Thai it is," she responded cheerfully. "The usual?" "Yeah," he managed. "The usual." Michael sat in the growing darkness of his office, listening to Rebecca hum while she placed their order on her phone. He pulled up the forwarded messages on his own device and stared at them until the words seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. He needed proof. Concrete, undeniable proof before he made any accusations. His mind, trained by years of debugging complex systems, began to formulate a plan. But what Michael didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know as he sat there in the dark, planning his investigation, was that the truth was far more terrifying than simple infidelity. The basement renovation that had brought David into their lives wasn't just a home improvement project, and the secret Rebecca was hiding went far deeper than an affair. In exactly 3 days, when Michael finally opened the locked door in their newly finished basement, he would discover something that would make him wish a simple affair was all he had to worry about. Michael spent the next 48 hours in quiet agony, playing the perfect husband while his mind raced with dark possibilities. He installed tracking software on Rebecca's phone while she slept, using his technical skills to hide it deep in the system. He set up a hidden camera in their bedroom, disguised as a phone charger. Every smile she gave him felt like a knife twisting deeper. On Thursday evening, Rebecca announced she had a girls' night with her friend Sarah. Michael nodded, kissed her goodbye, and waited until her car disappeared down the street. Then he opened the tracking app on his laptop. Rebecca's car didn't go to Sarah's house in northwest Portland. Instead, it headed east, toward the industrial district near the river. Michael's stomach churned as he watched the blue dust stop at a warehouse address. He grabbed his keys and followed, keeping several cars back as he drove through the darkening streets. When he arrived at the warehouse, Rebecca's SUV was parked next to a white contractor's van. The building was old, brick walls covered in graffiti, windows dark except for a faint light on the second floor. Michael parked across the street and waited, his phone recording everything. An hour passed. Then the warehouse door opened, and Rebecca emerged. But she wasn't alone. A man Michael recognized as David walked beside her, his hand on the small of her back. They stood talking in the yellow glow of a streetlight, and then David pulled her close and kissed her deeply. Michael's vision blurred with tears and rage. He wanted to storm across the street and confront them both, but something held him back. Professional instinct, maybe, the same methodical thinking that made him good at his job. He needed more evidence. He needed to understand the full scope of what was happening. As Rebecca drove away, Michael made a decision. He would go into that basement this weekend, when Rebecca was at her supposed yoga retreat. He would find whatever she and David were hiding. Because now he was certain this wasn't just an affair. The secret meetings, the mysterious warehouse, the locked basement door that David had installed without explanation, claiming it was for storage space security. Something much darker was happening in his home. Saturday morning arrived with cold rain pelting the windows. Rebecca left at dawn for her yoga retreat, kissing Michael's forehead before she went. He waited until her tracking data showed she was an hour away, then headed downstairs to the basement. The renovation looked professional, new drywall, recessed lighting, laminate flooring. But in the far corner stood the door that had haunted his thoughts all week. Heavy steel, industrial lock, completely out of place in a residential basement. David had claimed it was for storing expensive tools during the renovation, but the project was finished. Why was it still locked? Michael examined the lock. Commercial grade, requiring a key he didn't have. But years of working with security systems had taught him a few tricks. He returned upstairs, grabbed his lock-picking set from his electronics drawer, a relic from his college hacking days, and went back down. 15 minutes later, the lock clicked open. The smell hit him first. Chemical. Sharp. Like a hospital mixed with something else, something organic and wrong. Michael pushed the door open slowly, reaching for the light switch. What he saw made his knees buckle. The room was larger than it should have been, extending far beyond the house's foundation. Someone had dug out the space, created a hidden chamber. Along the walls were shelves lined with plastic containers, each labeled with numbers and dates. In the center sat a metal table with restraints. Medical equipment. Cameras mounted in the corners, their red recording lights blinking steadily. And on the far wall, dozens of photographs. Women's faces. Some smiling, casual shots. Others terrified, bound, crying. Michael recognized several from local news reports over the past 2 years. Missing women. Unsolved disappearances. His wife's face was in several photos too, but not as a victim. She was standing beside the women, smiling, wearing latex gloves. Michael's phone slipped from his trembling hands and clattered on the concrete floor. The sound echoed in the terrible silence. Then his phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca's tracking app. She was heading back home. ETA, 20 minutes. She knew he'd found the room. Michael's survival instinct kicked in. He grabbed his phone, took rapid photos of everything. The equipment, the photographs, the labeled containers, and sent them to his email, his cloud storage, everywhere he could think of. His hands shook so badly, he could barely hold the phone steady. 12 minutes until Rebecca arrived. He locked the basement door, raced upstairs, and called 911. The operator's calm voice felt surreal as Michael stammered out his address, mentioned the missing women, begged them to hurry. They told him to leave the house immediately. But as Michael grabbed his keys and ran for the front door, it swung open. Rebecca stood there, much earlier than the tracker had shown. Behind her was David, and he was holding a gun. "You couldn't just stay upstairs like a good husband," Rebecca said, her voice cold and unfamiliar. "I saw you on the cameras, Michael. Every room in this house has cameras, even your precious office." Michael backed away slowly. "The police are coming. I called them." David laughed. "No, you didn't. We've been jamming your cell signal for the past 10 minutes. That emergency call never went through." Rebecca stepped closer, and Michael saw a stranger behind his wife's eyes. 15 years you never suspected. 15 years I did my work, and you never once looked deeper than your computer screen. David and I have been partners for 7 years. The basement? That was always the plan." "Why?" Michael's voice cracked. "Why any of this?" "Money," Rebecca said simply. "There are people who pay very well for what we provide. Dark web clients. And you were the perfect cover. The oblivious tech husband, too buried in code to notice his wife's extracurricular activities." Michael's mind raced. If his phone didn't work, he needed another way out. His laptop upstairs had a separate internet connection. If he could reach it, he bolted for the stairs. Michael slammed his office door and shoved his desk against it. He could hear Rebecca and David pounding up the stairs, shouting. His laptop was still open, still connected. He pulled up his email with the photos, forwarded everything to the FBI tip line, the Portland police, every law enforcement email he could find. He included their names, the address, everything. The door shuddered as David rammed against it. Wood cracked. Michael opened his window. They were on the second floor, but the garage roof was below. He could jump. He threw the laptop into his backpack, climbed onto the sill, and leaped just as the door burst open behind him. He hit the roof hard, pain shooting through his ankle, then rolled and dropped to the ground. Behind him, he heard Rebecca screaming. Michael limped toward his neighbor's house, pounding on their door. "Call 911, he shouted. "Please, my wife is trying to kill me." The neighbor, elderly Mrs. Patterson, stared at him through the window, confused and frightened. But she reached for her phone. Within minutes, sirens filled the air. Police cars surrounded the house. Michael collapsed on Mrs. Patterson's lawn, watching as officers stormed his home. He saw Rebecca and David brought out in handcuffs, both screaming that Michael was crazy, that he'd fabricated everything. But when the forensics team entered the basement, their radios crackled with urgent voices. They'd found the room. They'd found the evidence. And they'd found something else, fresh blood that suggested Rebecca and David had been planning to add one more victim to their collection. Michael's own body. The interrogation rooms at Portland Police Headquarters were cold and sterile. Michael sat wrapped in a blanket, still shaking, as Detective Sarah Morrison reviewed his statement for the third time. "You're saying you had no idea," Detective Morrison said. 15 years of marriage, and you never suspected your wife was a serial accomplice to kidnapping and murder." "I didn't," Michael whispered. I thought she was just having an affair." The detective's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Chun, we've been investigating these disappearances for 2 years. Your wife and David Brennan are part of a larger network. The evidence in your basement. We've already identified remains belonging to 6 missing women. There may be more." Michael felt bile rise in his throat. "How many?" "We're still investigating. But based on the photographs and records we found, possibly dozens over the past 7 years." Over the next 3 days, the investigation exploded beyond anything Michael could have imagined. FBI agents raided the warehouse where he'd followed Rebecca, discovering a sophisticated operation that connected to similar cells across 5 states. David and Rebecca weren't just partners. They were mid-level operators in an international trafficking ring. The media descended on Michael's quiet Portland neighborhood like locusts. News vans lined the street, reporters shouting questions whenever he left the house. His face was plastered across every screen. Husband exposes wife's dark secret, and tech worker uncovers serial killer in his own home. Detective Morrison called him to the station for a meeting. When Michael arrived, she led him to a conference room where federal agents waited with grim expressions. "We need your testimony," Agent Rodriguez said. "Rebecca's lawyer is claiming you planted evidence, that you discovered her affair and created this elaborate frame-up out of revenge." Michael's blood ran cold. "That's insane. The bodies are real, yes. But her defense will argue you somehow manipulated the crime scene. We need to build an airtight case, and that means exposing every detail of your marriage, your finances, everything. Are you prepared for that?" Michael thought of the humiliation, the publicity, the complete destruction of his privacy. Then he thought of the women in those photographs, the families still searching for answers. "Whatever it takes," he said. 6 months later, the trial began. Michael sat in the courtroom gallery, watching Rebecca enter in an orange jumpsuit. She looked thinner, harder, her eyes scanning the room until they locked onto his. She smiled, a cold, calculated expression that made his skin crawl. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Forensic evidence, digital records, testimony from other victims who'd escaped. But Rebecca's defense attorney, a shark named Mitchell Krause, was relentless in attacking Michael's credibility. "Isn't it true, Mr. Chun, that you installed surveillance software on your wife's phone without her knowledge?" Krause asked during cross-examination. "Yes, but only after I saw suspicious messages." "So you admit to illegally monitoring her communications?" And you broke into a locked room in your own home using lock-picking tools. Sounds like someone comfortable with deception. I was looking for proof of an affair, not what you claim to have found. Krause's voice dripped with skepticism. How convenient that a spurned husband suddenly discovers his wife is a criminal mastermind. The jury looked uncertain. Michael felt panic rising. They were actually considering Rebecca's story. Then the prosecution called their surprise witness. A woman in her mid-20s took the stand, her hands trembling. She introduced herself as Amanda Torres, and Michael didn't recognize her until she began speaking. Rebecca Chun and David Brennan kidnapped me 14 months ago, Amanda said, her voice barely above a whisper. They held me in that basement for 3 weeks. The courtroom fell silent. How did you escape? The prosecutor asked gently. Rebecca made a mistake. She left my restraints too loose one night when she thought I was unconscious from the drugs. I managed to free myself and climb out through a window well. I ran until I found help. Why didn't you report this to police? Amanda's eyes filled with tears. They told me they had my family's addresses, that if I talked, my little sister would disappear. I was terrified, but when I saw the news about Michael Chun exposing them, I knew I had to come forward. Amanda's testimony shattered Rebecca's defense. She provided details only a true victim could know: the layout of the hidden room, the specific medical equipment, even the pattern of Rebecca's watch that she wore during the sessions. The prosecution corroborated everything with the evidence from Michael's photographs. But Krause wasn't finished. During cross-examination, he went for the throat. Ms. Torres, isn't it true you have a history of mental illness? That you've been hospitalized twice for psychotic episodes? Amanda flinched. That was years ago. After. Yes or no, please. Yes, but. And isn't it true you contacted Mr. Chun before this trial? That you two coordinated your stories? No. Amanda's voice rose. I reached out because I needed to apologize for not coming forward sooner. If I had, maybe those other women. She broke down sobbing. The judge called a recess. Michael found Amanda in the hallway afterward, surrounded by victim advocates. She looked at him with guilt-stricken eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have been braver. I should have stopped them before they took anyone else. Michael shook his head. You survived. That's what matters. And now they'll pay for what they did. But that night, Michael received a call that changed everything. It was Detective Morrison, and her voice was urgent. David Brennan just cut a deal. He's testifying against Rebecca in exchange for a reduced sentence. And Michael, what he's revealing is worse than we thought. David's testimony began the next morning. He sat in the witness box, avoiding Rebecca's murderous glare, and methodically destroyed any remaining doubt about her guilt. Rebecca was the leader, David said flatly. She recruited me 7 years ago after I did some contracting work at a property she was managing. She already had connections to the trafficking network. I was just muscle. And the victims? The prosecutor asked. Rebecca selected them. Young women, usually alone, no strong family connections. She'd befriend them first, at coffee shops, gyms, online. Gain their trust. Then I'd help with the abduction. Michael felt sick hearing the clinical way David described their operation. But worse was coming. What was Rebecca's role with the victims? The prosecutor continued. David's jaw tightened. She prepared them. Psychologically broke them down. She enjoyed that part. Said it was about control, about power. The money was secondary for her. Rebecca suddenly stood, screaming. You lying bastard. This was your idea. You manipulated me. The judge ordered her removed from the courtroom. As bailiffs dragged her away, she turned to Michael one last time. You'll regret this. She shrieked. I'll make sure you. The door slammed shut, cutting off her threats. The prosecutor turned back to David. One more question. Were there any other accomplices we should know about? David hesitated, then nodded slowly. Rebecca's sister, Jennifer. She handled the financial side, laundering the money through shell companies. And there's someone else. Someone bigger in the network we only knew as the broker. Rebecca met with him twice. She was terrified of him. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Michael's mind reeled. Rebecca's sister was involved? Jennifer, who'd been at their wedding, who sent Christmas cards every year. And who was the broker? The trial lasted another 3 weeks. Jennifer Chun was arrested trying to flee to Mexico with $2.3 million in cryptocurrency. She immediately confessed, providing evidence against a dozen other network members across the country. Michael watched it all unfold like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. His entire marriage had been a lie. His home had been a chamber of horrors. Even family gatherings had been attended by accomplices. Finally, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Rebecca showed no emotion as the verdict was read. 75 years to life without possibility of parole. David received 40 years for his cooperation. Jennifer got 35. Michael sold the house for a fraction of its value. No one wanted to live in a place dubbed the horror house by the media. He moved to Seattle, changed his phone number, and tried to rebuild a life from the ashes of his destroyed identity. But the consequences for Rebecca continued to mount. Her parents disowned her publicly, writing an open letter apologizing to the victims' families. Her former friends testified about her manipulative behavior over the years. Every aspect of her life was dissected and destroyed. The civil lawsuits came next. Victims' families sued Rebecca's estate for wrongful death. They won everything: her inheritance, her savings, even future book deal offers that opportunistic publishers had extended. Rebecca would leave prison with nothing but debt. Then came the psychological evaluation ordered by the court. The report, leaked to the media, painted Rebecca as a malignant narcissist with sociopathic tendencies. She'd been manipulating people since childhood, the evaluator concluded. Michael had simply been her longest-running victim. 6 months after sentencing, Michael received a letter forwarded through his attorney. It was from Rebecca, written from her maximum security cell. "You destroyed me," it read. "I gave you everything, and you threw it away over a moment of weakness. I hope you're happy living with what you've done." Michael read it twice, then burned it in his kitchen sink. Even now, she couldn't admit the truth, couldn't take responsibility. She'd rewritten reality so completely that she actually believed herself the victim. He never replied. But the story wasn't over. 8 months after the trial, Detective Morrison called Michael with urgent news. "We found him. The broker. His real name is Thomas Everett, and he's been running this network for 15 years. We're raiding his compound in Montana tomorrow. I thought you'd want to know." The raid made international headlines. Thomas Everett, a wealthy tech entrepreneur, had been hiding in plain sight while orchestrating trafficking operations across 3 continents. When agents breached his property, they found evidence connecting him to over 200 victims. Rebecca's case had been the key that unraveled everything. Her digital records, her financial trails, her communications, all had led investigators to Everett. In trying to save herself by blaming others, she'd inadvertently exposed the entire network. Everett was sentenced to life without parole. 17 other network members were arrested worldwide. The FBI estimated that Michael's discovery had saved countless potential future victims. They called him a hero. Michael didn't feel like one. He felt like a man who'd lived 15 years in a lie, who'd been too blind to see the monster sleeping beside him every night. But slowly, with therapy and time, he began to accept a different narrative. He wasn't blind. Rebecca had been exceptionally skilled at deception. And when he finally did see the truth, he'd acted decisively. He'd chosen justice over self-preservation, truth over the comfortable lie. 2 years after the trial, Michael stood in his new apartment in Seattle, looking out at the rain-soaked streets. He'd started dating again. Carefully, slowly, with walls around his heart that might never fully come down. His therapist said that was okay. Trust, once shattered so completely, took years to rebuild. Amanda Torres had become an unexpected friend. She'd started a nonprofit supporting trafficking survivors, and Michael served on the board, using his tech skills to help develop safety apps and tracking systems, turning his pain into purpose. The nightmares still came sometimes. Dreams where he opened that basement door and found nothing, where everyone told him he was crazy, where Rebecca's manipulation had won. He'd wake sweating, reaching for his phone to confirm reality. But other nights, he slept peacefully. Rebecca sent occasional letters, each more desperate than the last. She'd lost everything: her freedom, her money, her reputation, her family. Other inmates knew what she'd done. She'd been attacked twice and spent most of her time in protective custody. The confident, charming woman Michael had married existed only in photographs now. Her final letter arrived on what would have been their 17th anniversary. It contained just 3 words: "I am sorry." Michael didn't know if she meant it. He didn't particularly care anymore. Rebecca's punishment wasn't his responsibility. The justice system, her fellow inmates, and her own conscience were handling that. His responsibility was healing, moving forward, learning to trust again. He threw the letter away unopened and went to meet his sister for coffee. Outside, the Seattle rain continued its steady rhythm, washing the streets clean. Michael pulled his jacket tight against the cold and smiled slightly. He was free. Finally, truly free. And Rebecca? Rebecca would spend the rest of her life in a cell, forgotten by the world she'd once manipulated so effortlessly, her name synonymous with evil. The cheater hadn't just gotten caught. She'd lost everything, including the one person who'd actually loved her despite all her flaws. That was karma enough.